Good evening, and welcome back to Relaxing Stories for Sleep. Tonight, we dive back into the ancient world to retell the great epic of Odysseus and Homer's famed work, the Odyssey. Relax, close your eyes, and sleep well as we dive into a world of monsters, heroes, gods, and fate. The smoke of Troy rose into the sky like a black banner of ruin, blotting out the stars that had shone upon the city for 1,000 years. The once proud towers, built of stone said to be older than the memory of men, cracked and tumbled under the fire set by Achaean torches. Screams echoed from the narrow streets, mingled with the ringing of bronze weapons and the crash of doors broken in by invaders. On the shore, Greek ships rocked gently, their prows decorated with carved eyes that stared impassively at the scene of destruction. Among the conquerors strode Odysseus, son of Laertes, king of rocky Ithaca, a small island in the Ionian Sea. He was no giant like Ajax, no dazzling beauty like Achilles had been, nor was he a warlord with a vast army at his back. Yet it was Odysseus, of quick mind and restless cunning, who had devised the wooden horse that now lay dismembered on the plain outside the Scaean gate, its hollow belly long since disgorged of armed men. The Trojans had thought it an offering, a gesture of peace. Instead, it was their doom. Odysseus walked through the ruined city with his cloak wrapped close against the embers drifting on the night air. His eyes, sharp and restless, took in everything: the treasures looted, the captives rounded up, the small knots of men still fighting in desperate corners. He had fought for 10 years on this soil, through dust, blood, and grief. Now it was over. Troy had fallen. But victory did not taste as sweet as he had once imagined. In the days when the Greek fleet had first gathered at Aulis under Agamemnon's command, already the gods had shown their bitterness at the sack. He thought of Cassandra, daughter of Priam, who had screamed warnings no one believed, now dragged away as a slave of Agamemnon. He thought of Neoptolemus, son of Achilles, cutting down old King Priam on the very altar of Zeus. Sacred places had been defiled, the bonds of guest friendship, so sacred to Greek culture, trampled in the dust. Such deeds were not forgotten by the gods. In the Homeric world, to violate Xenia, the code of hospitality and respect owed to host and guest alike, was to offend Zeus himself, protector of strangers. Odysseus, more than most, understood the weight of divine wrath. Yet even as he reflected, he could not help but feel a certain grim pride. He had achieved what no brute force could accomplish. For 10 years the Greeks had battered the walls of Troy, lost heroes to arrows and disease, watched their morale sink under endless war. It was Odysseus who thought of guile, who built the horse, who persuaded the leaders to risk such a strange plan. He had outwitted Priam's city, just as he had outwitted so many foes. Now came the reckoning. The Greeks would sail home, each man to his kingdom, but the sea was vast, and the gods were fickle. Already there were omens of unrest. Calchas the seer had warned that Athena, once their ally, was enraged by the sacrilege of her temple. Poseidon, lord of the sea, had been long offended by Greek arrogance. To cross the wine-dark sea required not only sails and oars but divine favor, and Odysseus, clever though he was, would find the gods a harder enemy than any mortal man. That night, while others feasted on plunder, Odysseus sat apart, staring into the flames. He thought of Ithaca, His island home, green and craggy, with its steep cliffs rising from the sea. It was not a rich land like Mycenae or Sparta, but it was his, and his heart yearned for it. There dwelt Penelope, his faithful wife, whose weaving hands and keen mind matched his own in patience and cunning. There grew Telemachus, his son, scarcely more than a babe when Odysseus sailed for Troy. 10 years had passed. How tall was the boy now? Did he know his father only by name, or had Penelope taught him to speak of Odysseus as more than a shadow? In Homeric culture, a man's kleos, his fame, his story, was his immortality. Odysseus had won glory at Troy, his name woven into the songs of bards. But fame was a distant comfort compared to the yearning for hearth and kin. A Greek hero was torn between Nostos, the longing for homecoming, and Kleos. Achilles, before him, had chosen fame over long life. Odysseus, more mortal in his desires, longed above all to return. Yet in that moment of longing, there stirred in his heart a strange unease. He, who had guided the Greeks to victory, was not yet free. His story, he sensed, had only begun. On Olympus, the gods too watched the smoking ruins of Troy. The immortals, anthropomorphic and capricious, had taken sides in the war. Some favored the Greeks, others the Trojans, their rivalries rooted in old grudges, loves, and insults. Now that the city was ash, their quarrels turned to what should become of the victors. Athena, grey-eyed goddess of wisdom, once a patron of Odysseus, was angered by the outrages committed in Troy's fall. Poseidon, lord of earthquakes and seas, bore a personal hatred of Odysseus for reasons yet to unfold. Zeus, high father of gods and men, weighed the fates. For in the Homeric vision, men were not merely masters of their destinies. They were woven into a cosmic fabric where divine will and mortal choice tangled endlessly. It was decided, though not spoken in one voice, that Odysseus would wander. His journey would be long, perilous, marked by trials that tested every quality he possessed: cunning, endurance, leadership, loyalty. He would become a symbol not only of Nostos but of the resilience of the human spirit. And so, as the ashes of Troy cooled, the stage was set for the Odyssey, the wandering tale that would echo through the ages. As dawn broke over the ruins of Ilium, the leaders of the Achaean host gathered on the beach, their ships drawn up in long black rows. 10 years of war had thinned their ranks. Achilles lay buried under a great mound, his armor now borne by his son Neoptolemus. Ajax the Greater, once mighty, had died by his own hand, driven to madness after dishonor. Menelaus, king of Sparta, stood beside his brother Agamemnon, high king of Mycenae, their quarrels not forgotten but momentarily set aside. The men were eager to return, to see again the hills and fields of Greece. But they were also burdened with loot, captives, and quarrels over spoils. The sack of Troy had enriched them, but it had also brought divine displeasure. Calchas the seer warned them that sacrifices must be made and offerings given, lest the voyage home be cursed. Odysseus, pragmatic as ever, urged swift departure. He knew the sea was fickle, and delay meant danger, but the army was a multitude, and not all were wise. Some lingered to divide treasures, others to desecrate shrines. Already a shadow hung over the fleet. When at last the Greeks set sail, their sails swelling with the north wind, joy lifted their hearts. Home seemed within reach. But the gods had other designs. No sooner had the fleet cleared the Trojan coast than storm clouds gathered. The sea grew restless, waves rising like dark walls. Lightning flashed across the sky. Zeus himself hurled his thunderbolts, scattering the proud armada. Some ships were wrecked upon the rocks. Others were driven far from their course. The hubris of the Greeks at Troy's sack was not forgotten. To them, the storm was not mere chance, it was divine retribution, a theme that underpinned all Greek thought. When mortals grew too arrogant, the gods struck them down. Odysseus' ship, stoutly built and manned by loyal Ithacans, survived the tempest. His skill as a leader, steady at the helm, kept despair from his men's hearts. But they were driven south, far from the straight path home, to lands strange and perilous. Thus began the long wandering that would make his name immortal. The first shore they reached was that of the Cyclades, a people who dwelt in Thrace, warriors who rode swift horses and lived in fortified towns. Weary from the storm, Odysseus and his men fell upon a coastal settlement, seeking supplies. They sacked the town, taking wine, cattle, and treasure. At first, it seemed a victory easily won. But Odysseus, wise in counsel, urged his men to withdraw quickly. He knew well that to linger after a raid invited reprisal. Yet his crew, flushed with success and heavy with plunder, would not listen. They feasted and drank upon the beach, careless of danger. By dawn, the Cyclades returned in force, warriors from the inland riding chariots and spears gleaming in the sun. The Greeks, unready, were driven back to their ships. Many fell in battle, their bodies left on the sand. Odysseus fought fiercely to rally his men, but the cost was heavy. 6 men from each ship were lost before they escaped the shore. This episode, though brief in the great arc of the Odyssey, reveals much about Homeric values. The Greeks were raiders by custom. Plunder was a legitimate way of life, but so too was discipline, and Odysseus' warning went unheeded. The tale illustrates a recurring theme, the tension between wise counsel and human folly, a pattern that would repeat throughout their journey. As their ships pushed out to sea once more, Odysseus gazed back at the shore of the Cyclades. Already his nostos, his homecoming, was stained with blood. He feared what further trials the gods might set before him. For 9 days they were driven by winds and waves, the sea unending, until at last they came upon a gentle shore. The land seemed welcoming, with meadows, rivers, and flowering plants. The people who dwelt there were not fierce like the Cyclades, but peaceful and strangely languid. They were the lotus eaters, whose very diet was a danger. The fruit of the lotus was sweet and intoxicating. Those who ate it lost all desire to return home. The men Odysseus sent ashore tasted it and fell into forgetful bliss, content to remain forever in that dreamlike state. They forgot Ithaca, forgot Penelope, forgot all bonds of duty and loyalty. Here we see a cultural metaphor deeply woven into the Odyssey, the danger of forgetfulness, of abandoning one's identity and purpose. For the Greeks, to lose one's homecoming was to lose one's very self. The lotus symbolized a seductive oblivion, an escape from toil and suffering, but at the cost of honor and memory. Odysseus, with iron resolve, dragged his men back to the ships, even as they wept and begged to stay. He bound them under the benches until the sails were raised, forcing them away from the land of forgetfulness. It was an act both harsh and necessary, a testament to his leadership. Unlike Achilles, whose greatness was bound to his personal glory, Odysseus' greatness lay in his endurance and in his ability to shepherd others, even against their own will. Thus they sailed again into the unknown, the sea stretching before them like a fate unwritten. Already in these early trials, the shape of Odysseus' tale emerges. The Greeks knew of many kinds of heroes: Achilles, swift and wrathful, who chose death for glory; Ajax, strong but inflexible; Agamemnon, powerful but arrogant. Odysseus was of another type altogether, the hero of cunning and resilience. The Cyclones showed the cost of disobedience, the folly of ignoring wise counsel. The Lotus Eaters revealed the danger of forgetting, of surrendering to comfort and oblivion. In both, Odysseus stands as the figure who resists, who remembers his goal: home. In the oral tradition from which Homer drew, these episodes were more than mere adventure tales. They were moral lessons, woven into a grand tapestry of song, to teach listeners the values of endurance, prudence, and loyalty. The Odyssey was not only a story, it was a mirror of the human struggle to find meaning, to remain steadfast against distraction and despair. Beyond the land of the Lotus Eaters, Odysseus and his companions sailed until they came upon a strange coast, rugged and wild. The island was uncultivated, rich in pastureland but without the touch of human order. Herds of goats wandered freely on its slopes, unclaimed by any shepherd's staff. From the shore, Odysseus could see across a narrow strait to a greater land beyond, a place of high caves and smoke rising from fires. This was the realm of the Cyclopes, a race of one-eyed giants, children of Poseidon. Unlike the Greeks, who prized farming, community, and laws, the Cyclopes lived apart, each in his own cave, ruling over his family without assembly or council. To Homer's audience, this lack of shared governance marked them as barbaric, outside the circle of civilized humanity. The Cyclopes represented the antithesis of Greek life: no agriculture, no ships, no trade, no laws, no respect for strangers. Odysseus' men urged him to take what lay easily before them. On the smaller island, they found goats in abundance. "Let us seize them," his men said, "and load our ships with meat, wine, and cheese. Then we can sail swiftly homeward." It was a prudent plan, safe, practical, in line with Odysseus' supposed cunning. But here Odysseus' restless spirit betrayed him. He longed not merely for sustenance, but for experience. He wished to see the Cyclopes with his own eyes, to test their nature, to learn whether they would offer him gifts of hospitality. This hunger for knowledge and encounter, though noble in some respects, was also dangerous. Time and again, Odysseus' curiosity would draw him into peril, so he chose to leave most of his fleet behind and set out with a single ship and a band of chosen men toward the land of the Cyclopes. They came upon a vast cavern in the cliffs, its mouth wide as a temple gate. Inside were pens of lambs and kids, racks of cheese, jars of milk, wealth in abundance. But the cave's master was absent, tending his flocks on the hills. Odysseus' men urged him once more, "Let us take what lies before us, before the giant returns. We can load the cheeses, drive off the lambs, and return in safety to the ships." Yet again Odysseus refused. He wished to see this man-beast, to test whether he honored the laws of Xenia, for in Greek thought, to offer hospitality to strangers was a sacred duty, overseen by Zeus himself. A guest might be friend, foe, or god in disguise. To treat him with honor was a measure of one's piety and civilization. So they lingered, building a fire, helping themselves to a modest share of the food, waiting for the master's return. When at last he came, the earth seemed to quake beneath his tread. Polyphemus, son of Poseidon, was a towering figure, massive as a mountain, with a single eye burning like a torch in the middle of his forehead. He drove his flocks into the cave and rolled a boulder across the entrance so vast that 20 wagons could not have moved it. The Greeks were trapped. Polyphemus lit his fire and saw the strangers huddled within. In that moment, the ritual of Xenia should have begun, the host offering food, the guest introducing himself, gifts exchanged in mutual honor. Instead, the giant demanded harshly, "Who are you, strangers? Pirates, perhaps, who roam the seas for plunder?" Odysseus, ever mindful of custom, spoke with care. "We are Achaeans, returning from Troy, blown off course. We come as suppliants to your hearth. Remember that strangers and beggars are under the protection of Zeus Xenios." But Polyphemus mocked the gods. "We Cyclopes care nothing for Zeus and his laws. We are stronger than they. I will not spare you out of fear of heaven." With that, he seized 2 of Odysseus' men, dashed their heads against the stone floor, and devoured them raw, flesh and bone alike. Horror froze the Greeks. Never had they seen such a violation of sacred order. To eat one's guests was the most profound blasphemy imaginable, an inversion of all civilized values. Polyphemus was not merely a danger to their lives, he was a living affront to the moral order of the cosmos. That night, Odysseus lay awake, torn between rage and prudence. His first impulse was to kill the giant in his sleep, but he saw the fatal flaw in such a plan. The boulder at the cave's mouth. Without Polyphemus to move it, they would be entombed forever. This moment captures Odysseus' greatest strength. Not brute courage, but foresight and restraint. He could master his impulses, waiting for the clever solution rather than the rash one. At dawn, Polyphemus ate 2 more men for his breakfast and drove out his flocks, sealing the cave behind him. The survivors wept, but Odysseus devised a plan. Among the spoils they had carried from Troy was a skin of strong, sweet wine, given to Odysseus by Marin, priest of Apollo. This wine was so potent that it must be diluted with 20 measures of water. Odysseus kept it undiluted, a weapon as deadly as any spear. When Polyphemus returned in the evening, driving his sheep into the cave, Odysseus approached him boldly. "Cyclops, you have eaten my men. Perhaps you will accept a gift in return, as custom demands. Taste this wine. It is fit for the gods." Polyphemus drank, and the sweetness delighted him. He demanded more, and more again, until the firelight blurred and his monstrous head sagged with drunkenness. Before he slipped into sleep, he asked, "Tell me, guest, your name, that I may give you my gift." Odysseus, seizing his chance, replied with a cunning lie, "My name is Nobody. My father and mother call me Nobody, as do my friends." With a drunken laugh, Polyphemus promised, "Then I will eat Nobody last of all, after the others. That is my gift." Soon the giant sank into a stupor, his single eye heavy. Odysseus and his men, their hearts pounding, seized the great stake they had carved from an olive tree and hardened in the fire. Together they drove the red-hot point into the Cyclops' eye. The monster roared, thrashing in agony, but the stone stake hissed as it burned its way into his flesh. Blind and in pain, Polyphemus groped for his attackers. His cries roused the neighboring Cyclopes, who called from their caves. "What troubles you, Polyphemus? Are you slain by treachery or force?" From within, the blinded giant bellowed, "Nobody is killing me, nobody." The others laughed at his madness. "If no man harms you, then it must be the gods. Bear it, then, as best you can." And they returned to their sleep. Thus Odysseus' cunning triumphed, turning his false name into salvation. When dawn came, Polyphemus rolled the boulder aside to let his flocks out, standing in the doorway to feel for any escaping men. But Odysseus had devised one more trick. He bound his men beneath the bellies of the sheep, clinging to the thick wool as the animals shuffled past their blind master. Polyphemus stroked their backs but did not feel the men hidden below. Last of all went Odysseus himself, beneath the belly of the largest ram. The giant, sensing something amiss, spoke to the animal. "Why do you lag behind, dear ram, who always led the flock? Do you grieve for your master, robbed of sight? If only you had speech, you might tell me where that wretch nobody hides." But the ram only bleated softly, and Odysseus passed through to freedom. Once aboard their ship, the men rowed swiftly from the shore. Their hearts soared with relief, but Odysseus' pride would undo him. Standing on the deck, he could not resist taunting the blinded giant Cyclops. "It was not nobody who blinded you. It was I, Odysseus, son of Laertes, from Ithaca. Remember my name, so men may know who bested you." This was hubris, the fatal arrogance of revealing his name. Polyphemus, in his anguish, raised his hands to the sky and called upon his father, Poseidon. "Hear me, Earth-shaker. If I am truly your son, grant me vengeance. Let Odysseus never reach his home. But if it is fated that he return, let it be long delayed, with bitter suffering, and let him come alone, having lost all his companions." The prayer was heard. In that moment, Odysseus' Nostos became a curse. The trials ahead, storms, monsters, enchantresses, and the wrath of gods, would all flow from that fateful boast. The tale of Polyphemus is perhaps the most famous in the Odyssey, and for good reason. It captures the essence of Odysseus, cunning, resourceful, able to turn weakness into strength. Yet it also reveals his flaw, the inability to resist pride. Had he kept silent, Poseidon might never have singled him out. But to Odysseus, glory mattered too much. His name must be known, his deeds remembered. To Homer's audience, this tension was deeply human. No man could be purely prudent, nor purely reckless. The balance between wisdom and hubris, between memory and desire for fame, lay at the heart of the heroic struggle. As their ship vanished into the open sea, Odysseus knew not yet how heavy a price he would pay for that moment of pride. Odysseus' ship cut through the wine-dark sea, the salt wind whipping his cloak about him as the cries of the Cyclops faded behind the cliffs. His men rowed tirelessly, their muscles straining against the oars, yet their hearts were buoyed by relief and fear intertwined. Polyphemus' curse, spoken to the vast sky and to Poseidon himself, hung heavy on their voyage. Each wave seemed to whisper the threat of divine vengeance, each gust of wind a reminder that the path home would be fraught with trials far beyond mortal foresight. Yet Odysseus, ever vigilant, scanned the horizon, his sharp eyes measuring the distance to the next land, his mind weighing every possibility as both leader and protector of the men he had saved from the clutches of the one-eyed giant. After days of sailing, they reached an island of strange beauty, isolated and serene, where the mountains rose high and the valleys were lush with groves and rivers. Here dwelt Aeolus, keeper of the winds, a mortal granted divine favor, whose palace sat upon a peak overlooking the sea. Aeolus' halls were of bronze and gold, shimmering in the sunlight, and the corridors rang with music from lyres and pipes, a harmonious blend that mirrored the balance he maintained over the forces of air and storm. Odysseus approached with caution, mindful of the godly nature of this island and the fine line between mortal and divine favor. Aeolus received them with gracious hospitality, a prime example of xenia, the sacred law of hospitality so revered by the Greeks. He provided food and drink, but more importantly, he offered counsel and a gift of immense significance, a bag containing all the winds, save the gentle west wind that would carry them home. Sail carefully, Aeolus warned. Do not yield to curiosity or greed, for mortal hands are fragile against forces they cannot command. Keep this bag sealed, and the winds will obey you. Open it, and disaster will be your companion. Odysseus, with the care of one who understood both mortal prudence and human frailty, accepted the gift, and his men set sail with renewed hope. For many days, the west wind bore them swiftly over the deep, guiding them toward Ithaca. The men, worn by hardship and yet buoyed by the prospect of home, grew restless. They began to murmur, eyes cast toward the sealed bag, imagining treasure, power, and glory hidden within. Temptation, as it often does, found its mark in their hearts. Curiosity overcame discipline. One man, moved by doubt and desire, surreptitiously opened the bag while Odysseus slept. A terrible roar of wind burst forth, swirling in fury, throwing the ship off course, and scattering the fleet across the open sea. Their hope of a swift return vanished in an instant, replaced by the bitter taste of misfortune wrought by human weakness and divine oversight. After being driven far from their intended path, the scattered ships came upon the land of the Laestrygonians, a savage people whose reputation for cruelty and cannibalism had reached Odysseus through tales of mariners past. The first sight of the shore, dotted with immense cliffs and jagged rocks, filled his men with foreboding. The Laestrygonians themselves were monstrous in stature, towering over the Greeks, with hands and jaws capable of crushing men as easily as grapes. Odysseus, mindful of the lessons learned from Polyphemus, approached cautiously, sending scouts ahead while the ships lay anchored in a crescent bay. The scouts were swiftly overwhelmed. One by one, they were seized and devoured, their cries echoing against the cliffs and striking terror into the remaining men. The Laestrygonians hurled boulders from the heights, smashing ships and killing warriors indiscriminately. Only Odysseus' vessel, piloted with skill and a steady hand, avoided destruction, slipping past the rocks and fleeing into the open sea. Here again, Homeric culture reveals the harsh lessons of leadership and vigilance. The Greeks were not masters of all lands, and even cunning and valor could be tested to the limit. The sea itself became a proving ground, and only those who combined prudence with courage could survive. The survivors sailed onward, carrying the weight of grief for the comrades lost, and a growing awareness that the journey home would demand more than bravery. It required wisdom, restraint, and the continual negotiation with forces beyond human understanding. In time, they arrived at an island of extraordinary allure and danger, the domain of Circe, daughter of Helios, enchantress of potent magic and unparalleled beauty. Her palace, surrounded by cypress trees and gardens of strange flora, seemed at first a place of peace. Yet the air thrummed with latent power, a reminder that appearances in Homeric tales are often deceptive, and that mortals must look beyond surface charm to discern true intent. Odysseus sent a band of men ahead to explore, but they were quickly entranced by Circe's spell. One by one, she transformed them into swine, a vivid illustration of the peril inherent in yielding to temptation and the supernatural. The transformation itself was symbolic. Men consumed by base desires, stripped of their reason and humanity, become beasts. Odysseus, forewarned by Hermes, approached Circe with caution and a protective herb, moly, which shielded him from her magic. With courage and cleverness, he forced her to release his companions, restoring them to human form. In Circe's halls, Odysseus lingered for a year, not out of desire but for counsel and preparation. Here he learned of the trials yet to come, the peril of the siren's song, the monstrous Scylla and Charybdis, the sacred cattle of Helios, and the final reckoning awaiting him in Ithaca. Circe's instruction was both practical and moral, blending knowledge of geography, divine law, and human psychology. She reinforced the principle that survival required a balance of intelligence, courage, and respect for forces, both human and divine, beyond one's control. Odysseus left Circe's island with new understanding, his men restored and his course set once more toward the distant shores of home. Each trial had etched a lesson into his mind. Folly, pride, and disobedience could undo even the cleverest, while restraint, cunning, and attentiveness to divine and natural law could preserve life and honor. His journey, though filled with suffering, became a crucible in which the qualities that defined him, wisdom, patience, leadership, and resilience, were forged. The voyage ahead was no less perilous. Storms would rise, monsters lurk, and temptations abound. Yet Odysseus now carried not only the experience of Polyphemus, Aeolus, and the Laestrygonians, but also a deeper understanding of himself and his men. Each encounter revealed the fragile interplay between mortal agency and divine will, the human capacity for error, and the transformative power of endurance. With the wind at his back and Circe's counsel echoing in his mind, he steered toward the next stage of his Odyssey, where the sea, the sky, and the whims of the gods would test him in ways no man could predict. The sails of Odysseus' ship caught the west wind once more, though the sea seemed to whisper of trials yet unspoken. The crew, tempered by Circe's instruction and hardened by the disasters of Polyphemus and the Laestrygonians, rowed with steady determination, yet each man felt the shadow of uncertainty creeping over the horizon. The world of mortals was vast and unpredictable, but Odysseus knew that beyond the horizon lay even darker forces, where the living and the dead intersected, where mortal reason must bend to the designs of gods and fate. They reached the edge of a desolate shore, windswept and barren, where Circe had told him he would need to perform rites to summon the dead. This was the land of the Cimmerians, shrouded in mist, where no sun shone and the living rarely trod. Here, Odysseus followed her counsel, digging a trench and pouring libations of milk, honey, and dark wine. Sprinkling barley in a solemn offering to the dead, he recited prayers, calling upon the spirits of the underworld, invoking the great blind seer Tiresias. The rites were precise. In Homeric thought, ceremonial accuracy was essential, for the dead were not bound by mortal law and could turn cruelly upon those who slighted them. One by one, shades arose from the black pit of earth, heroes, companions, and kings, their forms dim and vaporous. Odysseus spoke first to Elpina, a crewman who had died carelessly on Circe's roof, pleading to bury his body properly so he might find peace. Then came the shadow of Tiresias, whose prophecy was both dire and necessary. Odysseus was warned of storms, of Poseidon's relentless wrath, of the peril of the island of the sun god, where sacred cattle grazed. Disobedience would bring death to his men, and he alone would return home, bearing the weight of sorrow and memory. The underworld, with its grim morality, reflected Greek cultural values: respect for the dead, obedience to divine law, and the inevitability of fate. Other shades appeared. Agamemnon, slain treacherously by his wife and her lover, warned Odysseus of domestic treachery. Achilles lamented the fleeting nature of glory, teaching that life's pleasures could outweigh the pursuit of immortal fame. Odysseus listened, absorbing lessons both practical and ethical, understanding that the voyage was as much about the cultivation of wisdom as it was about survival. Having communed with the dead, the men departed the misty land and steered back to the living world, hearts heavy with knowledge yet bolstered by purpose. Their course carried them past the siren-haunted waters. Here, Circe's counsel proved invaluable. Odysseus alone wished to hear the siren's song, that sweet, perilous music that promised knowledge and delight at the cost of life. He instructed his men to bind him to the mast, while they blocked their ears with beeswax, thus maintaining both curiosity and survival. The sirens sang, voices like liquid honey, promising secrets and endless fame, tempting the mind toward hubris and inattention. Odysseus, writhing against his bonds, felt the pull of their melody, yet could do nothing to endanger the crew. Their journey past the sirens illustrated Homeric themes: discipline, restraint, and the necessary guidance of a wise leader over those whose passions might endanger them. Beyond the sirens' rocks, the sea narrowed and darkened, churning between Scylla and Charybdis. Scylla, a six-headed monster perched in the cliffs, snatched sailors as they rowed too close, while Charybdis, a whirlpool that yawned like the mouth of the earth itself, threatened to swallow entire ships. Odysseus faced the impossible choice: risk the inevitability of Scylla's hunger or the utter destruction of Charybdis. He chose the path that would cost some men but spare the ship, accepting partial loss over total annihilation. In doing so, he demonstrated the balance of pragmatism and moral reasoning central to Greek heroic ethos. The hero must preserve what he can, even when the cost is tragic. The fleet, diminished but alive, sailed onward to the island of Thrinacia, where Helios' sacred cattle grazed, their golden hides shining beneath the sun. Circe's warning echoed, "Touch none of these cattle, for to harm them is to invite death and wrath beyond reckoning." Hunger and exhaustion gnawed at the men, and Odysseus, weary himself, fell asleep. In his absence, the crew, swayed by necessity and desire, slaughtered some of the divine beasts. When Helios discovered the transgression, he cried to Zeus, who unleashed a storm so violent that all the ships but Odysseus were destroyed. His companions perished, victims of impiety and disobedience, leaving Odysseus alone, a solitary survivor of the trials wrought by mortal weakness and divine will. Thus the lessons of the sea, of the dead, and of divine law were indelibly imprinted upon him. The journey became not merely a return home but a crucible, shaping Odysseus' character through suffering, cunning, and endurance. Every storm, every monster, every temptation tested the limits of human agency against the inexorable currents of fate and divine authority. The Homeric ideal was clear. Wisdom, foresight, and restraint were as heroic as physical valor, obedience to the gods' laws as essential as skill in battle. With the loss of all companions and the sea still stretching endlessly before him, Odysseus set his course once more for Ithaca. The solitary journey amplified every hardship, yet also honed his leadership, resolve, and ingenuity. Alone, he would face monsters both tangible and metaphorical, confront the consequences of pride and folly, and, ultimately, return to reclaim his home, family, and honor. His story, already immortalized by the bards, now unfolded in its most testing chapters, where the interplay of human determination, divine intervention, and moral choice reached its zenith. And so he sailed, guided by memory, prophecy, and the faint glimmer of hope, that even the mightiest storms of Poseidon could not extinguish the longing for home, the enduring power of Nostos, which sustained him through trials that would become legend. The sea, dark and relentless, had spared Odysseus' solitary vessel, but not without leaving him weary in body and mind. Days blurred into nights as he drifted, guided only by the faint glimmer of hope that Ithaca lay somewhere beyond the horizon. The waves, though cruel, carried him toward a distant island, a place of verdant forests and cliffs rising sharply from the sea. Ogygia, the isle of the nymph Calypso, daughter of Atlas. He landed upon its shores exhausted, limbs numb, eyes heavy with salt and weariness. At first glance, the island seemed a paradise, trees laden with fruit, streams crystal clear, and groves fragrant with unknown blooms. Birds sang in the branches, their voices mingling with the whisper of the wind through the leaves. Yet beneath the beauty lay the subtle tension of enchantment. The island was a place removed from mortal reckoning, where the ordinary laws of men were suspended in favor of the timeless powers of the gods and nymphs. Calypso herself appeared before him, radiant as the dawn. Her hair shimmered like spun gold, her eyes deep as the sea that surrounded her island. She welcomed him with words of honeyed promise, safety, comfort, and even immortality, should he remain with her forever. Here, Homeric culture reveals one of its central dilemmas, the tension between desire for ease, pleasure, and eternal life, and the inexorable pull of duty, honor, and nostos, the longing for home. Many men might have succumbed entirely to such temptation, forsaking their past lives for eternal comfort. Odysseus, however, though deeply tempted, remembered the faces of Penelope and Telemachus, the olive groves of Ithaca, and the enduring flame of home. For 7 years, he remained on Ogygia, cared for by Calypso and indulged in pleasures that softened both body and spirit. Yet even amid abundance, a quiet melancholy gnawed at him. In the Homeric ethos, true heroism lies not merely in survival or indulgence, but in the pursuit of one's rightful path. The prolonged stay on Ogygia symbolized both temptation and testing. Could Odysseus endure comfort without losing purpose? Could he resist the allure of divine love and forgetfulness, as he had once resisted the lotus and the sirens? Meanwhile, the gods on Olympus deliberated over his fate. Athena, ever his patron, pleaded with Zeus to intervene, arguing that Odysseus' Nostos must be preserved. Hermes was dispatched as messenger, tasked with instructing Calypso to release her captive hero. This moment illustrates the intricate interplay between divine will and mortal agency that permeates Homeric thought. While human choices matter, they are perpetually shadowed by the gods' judgments, alliances, and grudges. When Hermes arrived, he delivered the decree with the authority of the Sky Father. Odysseus must leave. Calypso, though angry and sorrowful, obeyed the command. She provided him with tools and provisions, crafting a raft strong enough to bear him across the open sea. Though it pained her to let him go, the goddess acknowledged the inevitability of mortal destiny. The interaction highlights another key theme in the Odyssey. Even divine beings are bound by cosmic law, and mortal heroism is inseparable from the rhythms of fate. Odysseus sets sail once more, the raft carrying him over waters now treacherous with the remnants of storms and the eyes of Poseidon still watching. Waves lashed at the small vessel, winds threatened to capsize it, and exhaustion pressed upon him like a weight. Yet the thought of Ithaca, of his son and wife, drove him forward. His mind recalled Circe's lessons, the counsel of Tiresias, and the enduring principle that human perseverance in the face of divine and natural adversity defines true heroism. After 17 days, the raft began to falter under the relentless forces of sea and sky. Poseidon, still incensed by the blinding of his son Polyphemus, hurled a great tempest, threatening to drown Odysseus and erase his Nostos entirely. Yet Athena, unseen but ever present, aided him. She guided him to cling to the remnants of the wreck, urging him to swim with all his remaining strength. The struggle between mortal determination and divine wrath reached its apex. Odysseus, buffeted and beaten, yet unbowed, fought the sea with a mixture of cunning, skill, and sheer willpower. Finally, he reached the shore of Scheria, land of the Phaeacians, a people renowned for their seamanship, hospitality, and culture. Exhausted beyond measure, he lay on the sand, near death, yet still alive, a testament to the power of endurance and the human spirit. Here, as in previous episodes, Homer illustrates a recurring pattern. Suffering and perseverance refine the hero, teaching lessons not only in survival but in wisdom, patience, and moral understanding. The Phaeacians, observing the stranger, acted in accordance with the sacred laws of hospitality. They provided clothing, food, and a place to rest, asking only for the story of his journey in return. Odysseus, ever mindful of the importance of reputation, kleos, and narrative, recounted the tale of Troy, the Cyclops, Circe, the underworld, the Sirens, Scylla, and Charybdis, and the death of his companions. As he spoke, the Phaeacians marveled not only at his cunning and bravery, but at his wisdom in navigating both mortal perils and divine caprice. In this narrative, Homer emphasizes several themes central to Greek culture: the value of storytelling as a means of preserving memory and honor, the moral weight of leadership, and the balance between cleverness and humility. Odysseus' tale is not merely a recounting of adventure, it is a living lesson for his listeners, a mirror reflecting the dangers of hubris, the necessity of prudence, and the enduring power of resilience and loyalty. Finally, the Phaeacians aided him in returning to Ithaca, providing a ship and skilled sailors to carry him home. At last, after nearly 20 years, Odysseus approached the shores of his native land, weary but unbroken, carrying with him the cumulative wisdom and scars of all his trials. The journey had tested him in body, mind, and spirit. It had forced him to confront mortality, divine wrath, temptation, and the limits of human endurance. Yet through perseverance, cunning, and fidelity to his nostos, he had survived. As he disembarked on the familiar sands of Ithaca, Odysseus' story was far from over. The homecoming would demand further cunning, patience, and moral discernment. The suitors who plagued his household would not yield easily, and the restoration of justice and order would require as much ingenuity as any encounter with monsters or gods. Yet the lessons learned across the oceans and islands of his Odyssey had prepared him for this final trial, the reclamation of home, family, and honor. Thus concludes this segment of Odysseus' epic journey, illustrating the interplay of human agency, divine influence, and cultural ideals. It is a testament to the endurance of the hero and to the values embedded within Homeric thought: wisdom tempered by experience, courage guided by prudence, and the ultimate triumph of Nostos against the relentless forces of the world. Odysseus' ship glided silently through the twilight waters toward the familiar coastlines of Ithaca, the land of olive groves, rugged hills, and the hearth of his family. Though the journey had left him weathered and scarred, every glance at the approaching shore stirred a fire of longing in his heart. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the land, and for a moment he allowed himself to imagine the embrace of Penelope, the laughter of Telemachus, and the serenity of a household restored. Yet prudence and cunning remained his companions, for the house he once knew had been transformed into a den of treachery and disorder. The kingdom, though outwardly peaceful, had been overrun by suitors, men of wealth and influence who had defiled his halls, squandered his wealth, and pressed Penelope to choose a new husband. In the Homeric worldview, such behavior violated the sacred principles of Xenia, as they treated not only the property, but the very household of their host with contempt. Odysseus, disguised by Athena as a beggar, stepped ashore with caution, keenly aware that recognition too soon could bring peril. Every step he took through Ithaca was calculated, his mind weighing strategy against brute force, reflection against impulse. He first made his way to the hut of Eumaeus, the loyal swineherd who had tended the pigs and preserved the memory of his master. Eumaeus received the stranger with the courtesy due to a guest, yet noted the poverty and fatigue in his appearance. Odysseus, careful in his speech, spun tales of distant lands and hardships endured, concealing his true identity while testing the loyalty and character of those around him. Through this encounter, Homer illustrates a central cultural theme: the recognition of loyalty and virtue, even in the lowliest of servants, and the moral order that will ultimately reward fidelity. Meanwhile, Telemachus, grown now into a man of strength and prudence, returned from his travels seeking news of his father. Athena guided his steps, ensuring he would meet Odysseus in disguise, allowing the father and son to plan the reclamation of their home carefully. Their meeting, initially shrouded in secrecy, was tender and profound. The reunion of father and son represents a deeply human and cultural moment: the continuity of family, the transmission of courage and wisdom, and the restoration of generational bonds severed by war and absence. Odysseus and Telemachus conspired, plotting the defeat of the suitors who had violated the household. The beggar's disguise allowed Odysseus to observe the suitors, noting their arrogance, vice, and disregard for divine law. Each man's character, as Homer emphasizes, revealed the consequences of hubris. To flout custom and morality invited ruin, just as the lotus eaters and Helios cattle had punished his companions. The stage was set for both justice and narrative closure, a demonstration of moral equilibrium central to the Odyssey. The climax unfolded during the contest of the bow, a seemingly simple challenge that concealed the fate of the household. Penelope, wise and patient, had devised a test only Odysseus could accomplish: to string his great bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads. The suitors, confident in their strength and skill, failed one by one. When Odysseus revealed himself, stringing the bow with effortless precision, the hall fell into stunned silence. This act symbolized not only the hero's physical prowess, but the culmination of his cunning, experience, and divine favor, the synthesis of all that had been tested across his journey. What followed was swift and decisive. With Telemachus at his side, Odysseus unleashed his vengeance. Arrows flew, spears were hurled, and the suitors, despite their numbers, could not withstand the combination of strategy, experience, and divine aid. Athena's presence ensured the balance of power favored justice, illustrating the Homeric principle that righteous action, aligned with both moral and divine law, achieves order where arrogance once reigned. Once the suitors were vanquished, Odysseus turned his attention to the household and the restoration of order. The disloyal servants were punished, the property returned, and Penelope, ever discerning and wise, tested Odysseus to confirm his identity. The bed, crafted from an olive tree rooted firmly in their chamber, became the final symbol of recognition, a testament to constancy, ingenuity, and the intimate bond that time and hardship could not sever. Through this, Homer emphasizes the importance of memory, domestic fidelity, and the restoration of moral and social balance. In the days that followed, Ithaca began to recover its rightful order. Odysseus, tempered by suffering and seasoned by wisdom, ruled with prudence and justice. The themes of Nostos, Kleos, and the interplay of human and divine will had reached their fulfillment. The hero returned home, surviving against insurmountable odds, restoring his household, and reconciling the demands of honor, family, and the gods. The narrative, though complete in its arc, leaves the reader with a reflection on endurance, morality, and the consequences of both action and inaction. The Odyssey, in its entirety, stands as a monumental meditation on the human condition. Through Odysseus' trials, from the fall of Troy, the blinding of the Cyclops, the temptations of Circe and Calypso, the horrors of the underworld, the perils of the sirens and sea monsters, to the restoration of his home, Homer weaves a story of courage, wisdom, restraint, and perseverance. Each episode reflects the values of ancient Greek culture, the sanctity of hospitality, the importance of loyalty, the danger of hubris, and the enduring power of human intellect and resilience. Ultimately, Odysseus' journey is both literal and metaphorical. The seas he traverses mirror the inner landscape of human struggle, where reason must navigate desire, prudence must temper impulse, and endurance must overcome adversity. The reunion with his family and the reclamation of his household mark the fulfillment not only of a hero's nostos, but of the cultural ideals that define heroism: courage tempered by wisdom, action guided by moral understanding, and the delicate balance between mortal agency and divine orchestration. In this way, the Odyssey endures as a work of unparalleled narrative richness, cultural insight, and moral reflection, a story that, through the trials of one man, illuminates the complexities, challenges, and ultimate triumphs of human life itself. Odysseus' ship glided silently through the twilight waters toward the familiar coastlines of Ithaca, the land of olive groves, rugged hills, and the hearth of his family. Though the journey had left him weathered and scarred, every glance at the approaching shore stirred a fire of longing in his heart. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the land, and for a moment he allowed himself to imagine the embrace of Penelope, the laughter of Telemachus, and the serenity of a household restored. Yet prudence and cunning remained his companions, for the house he once knew had been transformed into a den of treachery and disorder. The kingdom, though outwardly peaceful, had been overrun by suitors, men of wealth and influence who had defiled his halls, squandered his wealth, and pressed Penelope to choose a new husband. In the Homeric worldview, such behavior violated the sacred principles of Xenia, as they treated not only the property, but the very household of their host with contempt. Odysseus, disguised by Athena as a beggar, stepped ashore with caution, keenly aware that recognition too soon could bring peril. Every step he took through Ithaca was calculated, his mind weighing strategy against brute force, reflection against impulse. He first made his way to the hut of Eumaeus, the loyal swineherd who had tended the pigs and preserved the memory of his master. Eumaeus received the stranger with the courtesy due to a guest, yet noted the poverty and fatigue in his appearance. Odysseus, careful in his speech, spun tales of distant lands and hardships endured, concealing his true identity while testing the loyalty and character of those around him. Through this encounter, Homer illustrates a central cultural theme: the recognition of loyalty and virtue, even in the lowliest of servants, and the moral order that will ultimately reward fidelity. Meanwhile, Telemachus, grown now into a man of strength and prudence, returned from his travels seeking news of his father. Athena guided his steps, ensuring he would meet Odysseus in disguise, allowing the father and son to plan the reclamation of their home carefully. Their meeting, initially shrouded in secrecy, was tender and profound. The reunion of father and son represents a deeply human and cultural moment. The continuity of family, the transmission of courage and wisdom, and the restoration of generational bonds severed by war and absence. Odysseus and Telemachus conspired, plotting the defeat of the suitors who had violated the household. The beggar's disguise allowed Odysseus to observe the suitors, noting their arrogance, vice, and disregard for divine law. Each man's character, as Homer emphasizes, revealed the consequences of hubris. To flout custom and morality invited ruin, just as the lotus eaters and Helios cattle had punished his companions. The stage was set for both justice and narrative closure, a demonstration of moral equilibrium central to the Odyssey. The climax unfolded during the contest of the bow, a seemingly simple challenge that concealed the fate of the household. Penelope, wise and patient, had devised a test only Odysseus could accomplish: to string his great bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads. The suitors, confident in their strength and skill, failed one by one. When Odysseus revealed himself, stringing the bow with effortless precision, the hall fell into stunned silence. This act symbolized not only the hero's physical prowess, but the culmination of his cunning, experience, and divine favor, the synthesis of all that had been tested across his journey. What followed was swift and decisive. With Telemachus at his side, Odysseus unleashed his vengeance. Arrows flew, spears were hurled, and the suitors, despite their numbers, could not withstand the combination of strategy, experience, and divine aid. Athena's presence ensured the balance of power favored justice, illustrating the Homeric principle that righteous action, aligned with both moral and divine law, achieves order where arrogance once reigned. Once the suitors were vanquished, Odysseus turned his attention to the household and the restoration of order. The disloyal servants were punished, the property returned, and Penelope, ever discerning and wise, tested Odysseus to confirm his identity. The bed, crafted from an olive tree rooted firmly in their chamber, became the final symbol of recognition, a testament to constancy, ingenuity, and the intimate bond that time and hardship could not sever. Through this, Homer emphasizes the importance of memory, domestic fidelity, and the restoration of moral and social balance. In the days that followed, Ithaca began to recover its rightful order. Odysseus, tempered by suffering and seasoned by wisdom, ruled with prudence and justice. The themes of Nostos, Kleos, and the interplay of human and divine will had reached their fulfillment. The hero returned home, surviving against insurmountable odds, restoring his household, and reconciling the demands of honor, family, and the gods. The narrative, though complete in its arc, leaves the reader with a reflection on endurance, morality, and the consequences of both action and inaction. The Odyssey, in its entirety, stands as a monumental meditation on the human condition. Through Odysseus' trials, from the fall of Troy, the blinding of the Cyclops, the temptations of Circe and Calypso, the horrors of the underworld, the perils of the sirens and sea monsters, to the restoration of his home, Homer weaves a story of courage, wisdom, restraint, and perseverance. Each episode reflects the values of ancient Greek culture, The sanctity of hospitality, the importance of loyalty, the danger of hubris, and the enduring power of human intellect and resilience. Ultimately, Odysseus' journey is both literal and metaphorical. The seas he traverses mirror the inner landscape of human struggle, where reason must navigate desire, prudence must temper impulse, and endurance must overcome adversity. The reunion with his family and the reclamation of his household mark the fulfillment not only of a hero's nostos, but of the cultural ideals that define heroism: courage tempered by wisdom, action guided by moral understanding, and the delicate balance between mortal agency and divine orchestration. In this way, the Odyssey endures as a work of unparalleled narrative richness, cultural insight, and moral reflection, a story that, through the trials of one man, illuminates the complexities, challenges, and ultimate triumphs of human life itself.